Yes, sir.
So we're starting with the topic of uterus and adnexa. The word adnexa, ad is two words. Nexa is a network. There are a lot of structures on the out surrounding the uterus, which is together called as adnexa. So when you have a specimen of uterus in your hand, usually the associated structures will also be seen. The uterine tube, the ovary, the vagina. So you don't identify it as just as uterus, call it as uterus and adnexa, or uterus with adnexa. The word uterus in Greek is called by two other terms, hyster and metro. When you remove the uterus, it's called hysterectomy, because you're using the Greek word. And you can see the inner cavity of the uterus, which is called as endometrial cavity, endometrial. And the inner lining of the uterus is called endometrium. The muscular layer of the uterus is called myometrium. And the peritoneum on the outside is called as perimetrium. So whenever you use the word metro or hyster, both refers to uterus. In former times, it was considered that the uterus migrates in the abdomen. And at that time, the person behaves, female behaves a little strange, and that is why the word hysteria came about. Now we know that the uterus does not migrate at all, it just remains where it is. But that is how the term hysteria was coined. So we are going to go under the 10 headings of uterus: location, morphology, relations, blood supply, lymphatics, nerve supply, histology, embryology, and physiology, and anatomy in the living or living anatomy. So the location of the uterus, it is just behind the bladder and slightly above it, in the pelvic cavity. So this is the pubic symphysis, and this is entirely a pelvic organ. During pregnancy, the uterus becomes abdominopelvic. So that is from the 12th week of pregnancy onwards. So up to 12 weeks of pregnancy, the uterus remains in pelvis. After 12 weeks, every 2 weeks it keeps on ascending. Every 4 weeks it keeps on ascending 2 fingers up. At the 6th week, at the midway of the pregnancy, it will reach the umbilicus, and 24 weeks, and at 36 weeks it will reach the zyphicer. Gynecologists usually use the word weeks rather than months or days. So 12 weeks at the level of pubic symphysis, 24 weeks at the level of umbilicus, 36 weeks at the level of the zyphicer. So otherwise it's the pelvic organ. The uterus has got 3 parts. The upper part, which is called as the fundus, the sides of the uterus, which you can see here, is the body, and the lower part of the uterus is called cervix. So fundus, body, and cervix. Remember, the word fundus is a dome-shaped structure which you see first when you do an abdominal surgery of the approaching the uterus. Other organs which have got a dome-shaped structure, fundus, is the gallbladder, whose lower border is fundus, the stomach, whose upper part is fundus. The fundoscopy is to visualize the back of the eyeball. So the back of the eyeball is also called as fundus. The cavity of the uterus, which we said is called as the endometrial cavity, is triangular when you see a coronal section, and the lower part of the uterus is called cervix, whose cavity is called as cervical canal. In the cervical canal, the connect junction between the cervix and the vagina is called as external os. The junction between the cervical canal and the uterine cavity is called as internal os. The internal os is of are 2 in number. The part of the cavity of the cervix, which is communicating with the cavity of the uterus in a non-pregnant state, is called as the anatomical os. During pregnancy, the upper part of the cervix becomes a part of the uterus. So the internal os of the pregnancy is at a lower level, which is called as histological internal os. So there is an anatomical internal os and a histological internal os. So the length of the cervix is 2.5 centimeter or 1 inch. The length of the uterus from the internal os to the fundus is 4.5 centimeters. The cavity, which we said is triangular in shape, but in a sagittal section it is slit shape. Cervix has got 2 parts. A part above the vagina, which is called as supravaginal cervix, and a part which is within the vagina is called as intravaginal cervix. The lateral wall of the uterus, which communicates with the fallopian tube on each side, the portion of the uterus above the opening of fallopian tube is defined as fundus. Also, one must remember that the long axis of the vagina runs inferior anterior to superior posterior. The long axis of the cervix is at right angles to the long axis of vagina, and because the cervix is bent forward, it is called as anteversion. So vagina cervix is called angle of version. Because the cervix is bent anteriorly, it is called anteversion. If the cervix bends posteriorly, it is called as retroversion. The angle between the long axis of cervix and the long axis of the uterus is around 170 degree. It is called as angle of flexion. Fundus, F flexion. So fundus and the uterine axis with the cervix is called angle of flexion. Because the uterus is bent anteriorly, it is called as angle of anteflexion. At times you can have the uterus bent backwards, then it will be called as the retroflexion. So automatically you have 4 combinations of the uterus and cervix: anteverted and anteflexed, retroverted, retroflexed, or other combination: anteverted, retroflexed, and retroverted, anteflexed. But usually before pregnancy, it is usually anteverted and anteflexed. After pregnancy, then it can vary. At times, multiple pregnancies later, the uterus will be retroflexed. At this moment, the so-called anterior surface of uterus is actually more inferior, and it is resting on the upper surface of the bladder. And the posterior surface is actually superior. It is resting with the is related to the coils of ileum. Relations: the space behind the rectum and in front of the space behind the uterus and in front of the rectum is called as recto-uterine pouch. Recto-uterine pouch. This pouch was described by a scientist called as Douglas. It is called as Douglas's pouch. The small space between the uterus and the superior surface of the bladder is called as uterovesical pouch. Uterovesical. Recto-uterine pouch is deeper That's why when a person lies supine, and even otherwise, the fluids and infective material, etc., will commonly gravitate to the recto-uterine pouch. This is in front and behind the bladder. You can also see that the superior surface of bladder is covered by peritoneum. In males, even a part of posterior surface is covered by peritoneum, half of the posterior surface. But in females, this is not so because the uterus is very closely related to the bladder. So only the superior surface of bladder is covered by peritoneum, and only the anterior surface of uterus, not the cervix, is covered by peritoneum. In contrast, when the peritoneum goes over the fundus and goes to the back of the body, behind the peritoneal fold dips down even below the cervix. So that is related to the upper part of vagina. Infective fluid in the Douglas's pouch, the recto-uterine pouch, can be approached from the posterior wall of vagina or anterior wall of rectum. And infective fluid can be aspirated out before it becomes a full-fledged peritonitis. On either sides of the uterus, the peritoneum goes and covers the organs which are adnexal organs of the uterus. So, fallopian tube, ovaries, the ligaments, the blood vessels are all covered by peritoneum. The peritoneum on the side of the uterus is given the name broad ligament. If the uterus is bent anteriorly, anteflexed and anteverted, that automatically supports the uterus. Because if you look back at the earlier slide, the uterus is bent anteriorly. So in case there is a pressure of the abdomen from above, it will tend to press the body downwards. But if the uterus were retroverted and retroflexed, it will be along the long axis of vagina. Any increase in abdominal pressure is likely to push the uterus downwards through the vagina, which is called as prolapse of uterus. So the anteverted and anteflex is natural for the uterus to prevent the prolapse, because any pressure on the fundus and the body will tend to lift up the cervix. Whereas if it is a retroverted retroflex, it is in the direction of the vagina, so it will be poorly supported. So mechanical supports are described as those supports which help the uterus in maintaining anteversion and deflection. On the sides of the uterus, there are a round ligament of uterus which is attached medially to the upper part of the uterus, just below and anterior to the lateral cornua. Lateral cornua are the place from where fallopian tube starts. Just below and just behind is the attachment of round ligament of ovary, which is attaches from ovary to uterus. So there is a round ligament connected from ovary to uterus is called as round ligament of ovary, and the round ligament of uterus is the one which is connecting uterus with labia majora. The round ligament enters the deep inguinal ring, it traverses the inguinal canal and terminates in labia majus. That's a singular of labia majora. The round ligament contains blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatics. The latter, that is the blood, nerves, and lymphatics and veins, drain the uterine origin of around the entry of uterine tube to the superficial inguinal lymph. Remember, the labia majora, being a part of external genitus, drains into superficial inguinal lymph nodes. So, round ligament and the uterus and fallopian tube in the region of round ligament also drain into superficial inguinal lymph nodes. The round ligament of the uterus and the round ligament of the ovary both are developed from Gubernacle. If you remember the testis, the lower pole of the testis was connected to scrotal swellings by a structure called as gubernaculum. This guides the testis to go into the scrotum. There is a similar gubernaculum in the inferior pole of ovary to the labia majus, which is equivalent to scrotum. But this ligament, this causes you ovary to descend but close to the uterus, beyond which it cannot go. So that means it is sort of the uterus has caught the gubernaculum in its way. So the ovary cannot descend and remains close to the uterus, connected to the uterus by a round ligament of ovary and beyond by the round ligament of uterus. Facial supports. At the level of the cervix, there are thickenings of the fascia which connect the cervix to the pubis, to the lateral wall of the pelvis, and to the sacrum behind. So they are called by three names: the pubocervical ligament, the lateral cervical ligament, and what should have been correctly called as sacrocervical ligaments, unfortunately is given the name uterosacral ligaments. So pubocervical, lateral cervical, and uterosacral ligaments are the three condensations of deep fascia which support the cervix, indirectly supporting the uterus as well. This fascial support is one of the important supports of the uterus, but for which the uterus has a tendency to pass through the vagina and which will cause prolapse. So the first support was mechanical support, the round ligament of uterus, which maintains the uterus in the antevertebral and anteflex position. Remember, when the uterus enlarges in the first pregnancy, the round ligament of uterus also enlarges because the fundus of the uterus goes all the way up to Zyphus. After the first pregnancy, the round ligament never retains its tone, so it remains slackened. So the mechanical support is useful only in the first pregnancy, whereas the facial supports continue to support the uterus even beyond pregnancy. This fascia, the three condensations, the pubocervical, lateral cervical, and uterosacral, retain its tone all the way up to menopause. After the hormonal decrease at menopausal level, the facial supports lack their tone, can't maintain the uterus for a long time. Incidentally, the lateral cervical ligament is also called as ligament of Beckenrod, named after the scientist who has named this ligament. The third type of support is called as muscular support. Here, what you are seeing is this muscle which is going to the lower limb is the piriformis muscle. That is not important. It's a lower limb muscle. Also on the lateral wall, there is obturator internus muscle. That's also a lower limb muscle. The remaining muscle that you can see here is called as the pelvic diaphragm. This supports the upper part of vagina, and therefore it is called as muscular support. Muscles which support the upper part of vagina indirectly supports the uterus and cervix. The pelvic diaphragm is subdivided into two parts. The part which is running from ischial spine to the sacrococcygeal junction is called as ischiococcygis or just the coccygeus. The part which is running from the pubis, body of pubis, and also the fascia covering the obturator internus to this area, also going to the sacrococcygeal junction and to the ligament, the raphe, which is lying behind the rectum and the coccyx, anococcygeal raphe. That muscle which is starting from the body of pubis and the fascia covering the obturator internus, going to the anococcygeal raphe is called as levator ani. Together, both these are called as pelvic diaphragm. I'll repeat again. The ischial spine to coccyx is called as ischiococcygis or just the coccygeus, running from the body of pubis and the fascia covering the obturator internals to the coccyx and the inner coccygeal raphe are called as levator ani. Levator ani is divided into a part which is starting from body of pubis is called as pubococcygeus. The part which is running from uh, fascia covering the obturator internals is called as iliococcygeus. So effectively, we have three parts of the hip bone: pubococcygeus, iliococcygeus, and ischiococcygeus. One must remember that the iliococcygeus actually arises from the fascia covering obturator internals, and obturator internals is entirely attached to ischium and pubis only. So the so-called iliococcygeus is not arising from ilium at all. In the lower animals, it was attached higher up. That's why it was called iliococcygeus then. In humans, because of biped posture, the attachment has slipped more inferiorly, giving rise to the continuation of the term, although incorrect, iliococcygeus. So we have pubococcygeus, iliococcygeus, and the coccygeus, the ischiococcygeus. Another point to be noted is that although here it is not shown that the iliococcygeus, sometimes there is a gap in the space connecting fascia of obturator internals and the origin of the muscle. If that gap remains at the level of iliococcygeus, that gap is called as hiatus of Schwalbe, and abdominal contents can herniate below into the perineum, which is like below the levator muscle. That is called as perineal herniation. The fibers of pubococcygeus, part of them go to the coccyx, part of them go to the anococcygeal raphe, part of them are not attached posteriorly, they just go swing around the rectum and come back to the opposite side. Such fibers are called as puborectalis muscle. And still closer to the midline, there are fibers which go around the vagina and come back to the opposite side. Such fibers are called as pubovaginalis muscle. In males, there is no vagina, but the lower part of the urinary bladder has got prostate. So it is called as puboprostaticus muscle. So the medial fibers of uh, levator ani, the pubococcygeus, have got a puborectalis sling and a pubovaginalis sling. Pubovaginalis will support the vagina and indirectly support the uterus and the cervix bone, preventing the prolapse of the uterus. So now we have seen that there are three supports of the uterus: a mechanical support which maintains the uterus in anteflexion and everted position. That's the round ligament of the uterus. The fascials, which is useful only in the first pregnancy. The fascial supports the pubocervical ligament, the lateral cervical ligament, and the posteriorly sacrocervical or uterosacral ligaments. Support the uterus all the way up to menopause, after which it loses its tone, whereas its muscular support to the uterus for the whole life. If perchance the muscular support of the uterus were damaged during childbirth, then uterine prolapse will not occur because the fascial supports are still there. So if the childbirth, say, has occurred at the age of 25 and the muscular support is damaged, you will not notice any prolapse of the uterus till the age of around 45 to 50 years. So that means till menopause, the facial supports are sufficient alone, but beyond menopause, muscular supports are required. That is why, especially the first childbirth, what is done to avoid damage to the pubovaginalis muscle, which is supporting the uterus. Behind the vagina, there is a structure called as perineal body. So, if the perineal body is damaged, the pubovaginalis fibers are also affected. So, a surgical cut is given to the vagina posterolaterally, which is called as episiotomy. So episiotomy is a surgical incision given to the posterolateral part of vagina to facilitate childbirth so that the perineal body is not damaged, which is one of the integral supports of levator muscle. Peritoneal cover over the uterus does not support the uterus at all. That's why the peritoneal cover covering the uterus is called as false support. So here is the peritoneum, which is going in. We are seeing a parasagittal section. That's why uterus is missing here, because we are looking at the broad ligament, which is lying on the lateral side of the uterus. So we have to make a parasagittal section to show the anterior and posterior disposition of the peritoneum. So peritoneum from the anterior wall and the floor of the pelvis goes up and covers the fallopian tube and reflects back. Posteriorly, there is a relation of ovary. So the peritoneum comes down up to the level of ovary, then goes towards the ovary, envelops around the ovary, comes back, and then descends down and goes to the posterior wall of the pelvis. So from the anterior wall of the pelvis to the posterior wall of the pelvis, the broad ligament on either side of the uterus envelops the uterine tube, envelops the ovary, and then descends back down. The portion of the broad ligament between the uterine tube and the ligament of the peritoneal fold of the ovary is given the name mesosalpinx, because it's actually from the salpinx, the tube, uterine salpinx, the tube, so uterine tube. Remember, when we say salpingopharyngeus, we are not referring to uterine tube, we are referring to the gestation tube. The word salpinx means tube. So connecting uterine tube up to the level of ovary is called as mesosalpinx. The part of the peritoneal fold which is going towards the ovary is called as mesoovarium. Mesoovarium. Remember, all these peritoneal folds are simple squamous epithelium, including the mesoovarium. But what is covering the ovary is wrongly called as germinal epithelium, because it's not giving rise to the germ cells, but those so-called germinal epithelium are actually cuboidal epithelium. So rest of the peritoneal fold is simple squamous, including mesoovarium. But the epithelium covering the cervix is simple cuboidal epithelium. The part of the broad ligament, which is going from the level of mesoovarium to the pelvic floor, is called as mesometrium. Remember, metro refers to uterus. So broad ligament conveniently divided into mesosalpinx, mesoovarium, and mesometrium. So parts of the broad ligament. Another point to be noted, below the broad ligament on either sides of the uterus runs the ureter. And above the ureter is the uterine artery coming to the lateral pelvic wall. So going to the, so you remember this as, often asked the relation of uterine artery and ureter. So you remember it as water under the bridge. Of course, there is no uterine artery in males, but the ureter is there. And at that point, the ureter is crossed by vas deferens or rectus deferens. Again, the relation is the same. Ureter is on the floor, rectus deferens is above. Remembered again as water under the bridge. You can see the close relation of uterine artery with the ureter and the uterine artery is coming towards the uterus. So during hysterectomy, you have to first ligate the uterine artery, only then you can remove the uterus. Care must be taken. The ureter also. Back pressure hydronephrosis resulting in kidney failure. Uterine artery must be, ureter must be guarded, pushed away from the body of uterus. Remember, during hysterectomy is often done in disease condition of the uterus, and many a times the uterus is enlarged. Disease condition. The lateral wall of the uterus going further laterally, and that time very closely related to the ureter. So don't clamp the uterine artery. Kindly identify the ureter, push it aside so that you can clamp the uterine artery alone without indirectly clamping the uterus as well. The ectouterine pouch or pouch of Douglas is a clinical region situated between the rectum and the uterus, which we already discussed. When a patient is in supine position, the ectouterine pouch is the lowest portion of abdominal pelvic cavity and is a site where infection and infective fluids collect. It can be examined by a finger in the rectum, index finger in the rectum, transrectal digital palpation, or you can examine through the vagina, putting index and middle finger into the on the posterior vaginal wall for vaginal examination, transvaginal examination, digital palpation. The abscess will be drained either through the posterior wall of rectum, vagina, or anterior wall of rectum. Blood supply. We've already discussed that the vaginal artery is a replacement of inferior vesical artery veins. So there is a separate uterine artery, which is a helicide artery, which means the tunica media, the muscle layer, are not circularly arranged, they are longitudinally arranged. So they are capable of enormous stretching when the uterus enlarges, and it's also capable of enormous dilatation to supply the thickened wall of the uterus during pregnancy. Remember, the uterus weighs only 50 grams in a non-pregnant state, and it weighs 1 kilogram, that is 20 times its size. Pregnancy. Also, what is labeled here is something called as umbilical artery. This umbilical artery is present in the embryonic period. After birth, the umbilical artery is closed, but a branch given off of the umbilical artery, which is called as superior vesical artery, continues to remain to supply the bladder upper part. So the so-called umbilical artery continues the superior vesicle. So the branch going to the umbilicus has become a ligament. So we call the artery as superior vesicle after birth. But before birth, it was primarily supplying the placenta. So it was called as the umbilical artery, and a branch given off from there called as superior vesicle. Veins will be corresponding, lymphatics will follow the arteries. Truly pelvic organs will drain into the internal iliac lymph nodes, but upper part of the pelvic organs also drain into external iliac lymph nodes, although no branch of external iliac actually supplies the pelvic organs. The internal iliac lymph nodes and the external iliac lymph node together form the lymph nodes on common iliac, and then they go and drain to the para-aortic nodes. A significant difference is that ovary, being a gonad, gets its blood supply from the gonadal artery at the lateral wall of the abdominal aorta at the level of L2 vertebra. So lymphatics of ovary directly go to the para-aortic lymph node, bypassing the internal iliac, external iliac, and common iliac. Ovary is very closely related to the lateral part of the fallopian tube. So lateral part of the fallopian tube also drains along with the ovary into the para-aortic lymph nodes. Whereas the medial part of the fallopian tube and the upper part of the uterus, which is closely related to the round ligament of the uterus, which goes to the labia majora. And since labia majora drains into the superficial equine lymph node, the medial part of fallopian tube and the upper part of uterus drains into the superficial equine lymph node. Cervix, the lower part of the uterus, drains into internal iliac lymph nodes primarily, and from there, indirectly, all of the lymph nodes will reach the para-aortic lymph nodes. And para-aortic and pre-aortic freely intermingle with each other. Even the superficial equine lymph nodes will drain into deep equine lymph nodes, from there into the external iliac, common iliac, and para-aortic. We have already discussed the further course. Para-aortic nodes has got a lumbar lymph tract, which drains into the cisterna chyli. And from the cisterna chyli to the thoracic duct, into the left venous angle, the junction between the internal jugular vein and subclavian. The next heading would be nerve supply. Remember, uterine contraction and relaxation are not controlled by nerves. They are controlled by other hormones. Whereas sensory fibers of the uterus, especially of pain, is carried by autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system, we know, is sympathetic and parasympathetic. Peculiarly, L1, L2 sympathetic fibers carry the pain from the uterus. S2, 3, 4 parasympathetic fibers carry the pain from the cervix. So uterine pathologies, uterine contraction, etc. will be referred to L1, L2 dermatome, that is the hypogastrium and medial part of the thigh, whereas cervical pathologies, pain fibers, which is carried by S2, 3, 4, will result in low back pain. So, and internal organs do not have pain and sensations due to cut, crush, or burn. Internal organs get the pain only during stretch, spasm, and ischemia. Remember, it has 3 S's which stimulate internal organs: stretch, spasm, and ischemia, decrease in blood supply. Ischemia was very Rao said ischemia, so that you remember it has 3 S's which stimulate. So whenever the uterus contracts during parturition, during childbirth, the pain is felt in the hypogastrium and the inner part of the thigh. Because of that, the cervix also dilates, which results in back pain, lower back pain, S2, 3, 4. And usually uterine contractions subside after the childbirth. But often the cervical stretch remains stretched for a longer time. The back pain, the backing of the cervical stretch results for a much longer time after childbirth. The uterus, which was only 50 grams, becomes 1 kilogram because of the effect of estrogen hormone, also secreted by placenta and the ovary also, and the growth factors. The growth factors like insulin-like growth factors, etc. These cause the rise, size, increase in size of the uterus. The uterine cavity enlarges 900 times during pregnancy. Weight increases 20 times. Progesterone is a hormone and oxytocin is a hormone, both of which control the uterus. Progesterone is for maintenance of pregnancy. Progesterone causes relaxation of the uterus and contraction of the cervix, keeping the embryo fetus within the uterus. So progesterone is the hormone protecting pregnancy, relaxes the uterus, contracts the cervix. Oxytocin has got a reverse action. It contracts the uterus and relaxes the cervix. So here you have 2 opposing hormones, progesterone and oxytocin. So progesterone maintains pregnancy for around 9 months. After that, the release of oxytocin facilitates uterine contraction, cervical dilatation, propelling the baby out. At times where the mother does not get the proper labor pains, oxytocin drip is given to facilitate child. In contrast, there is another chemical, ergotamine, some things like ergot alkaloids. This has got the property of contracting the uterus and contracting the cervix both. So ergot alkaloids should never be used till the baby is out. Otherwise, because of cervical contraction, the baby will get trapped into the uterus itself, and then you will be forced to do a cesarean section. So ergot alkaloids are given to reduce postpartum hemorrhage because they cause contraction of the uterus and the contraction of the cervix. And remember, we said in the uterus, the blood vessels lie in the myometrium, and therefore contraction of the muscle of the uterus will automatically clamp the blood vessels which are actually bleeding at the end of pregnancy, at the end of childbirth. So there was a question which was asked that exactly at what point should ergot alkaloids be used to reduce postpartum hemorrhage? And we know that the child during delivery, the head comes out first. The head is quite large. And after that, the shoulder comes out. Once the shoulder comes out, then the rest of the body, relatively poorly developed, easily comes out. So a question was asked in gynecology exam, when exactly will you inject ergotamine to reduce postpartum hemorrhage? And the student replied, after the shoulder has come out. So the examiner was impressed. Most people answer after the childbirth, immediately after childbirth, after the child has come out. He said very specifically, just as the shoulder comes out. But the examiner thinks the rest of the body will automatically. She was very good. Why did you say so? He said, how will we inject ergot alkaloids without the shoulder presenting? Because you want to inject the ergot into the shoulder. Never realized that the student was referring to the shoulder of the baby. We are talking about postpartum hemorrhage in the mother. Histology of the uterus, you can see here in the low power, a lot of ducts, and here you will see a lot of glands. The higher power of the ducts look like this, the higher power of the glands look like this. So this is the proliferative phase of uterus, low power, high power. This is the secretory phase of the uterus, low power. It is the secretory phase that the cells all enlarge and carry a lot of glycogen and fat droplets and other things, which is the changes in the stroma of the uterus is called as receptive for the implantation of the blastocyst. The process is called as residualization. So residualization starts in the second phase, the secretory phase, receptive to, after the implantation, the cells will further enlarge. That will be the proper residualization. Here it's in the process of enlarging and accumulating glycogen in lipid droplets. Development of the uterus, you can see in the thoracolumbar region, the intermediate mesoderm shows the thickening on the medial side. This is the gut tube. So this is medial, this is lateral. Thickening on the medial side called as genital ridge. And close to in relation to the genital ridge is a mesonephric tubule and mesonephric duct. From the coelomic cavity, the coelomic epithelium, it invaginates inside to form the paramesonephric duct. It is this paramesonephric duct which is on the side, crosses the midline and crosses the mesonephric duct which is close medial and comes to lie in the midline. The part of the paramesonephric duct which lies lateral later on becomes the fallopian tube. The part which is lying in the midline becomes the uterus and vagina. In the crossing over from lateral to medial, it encounters the ligament from the lower pole of the ovary, which is gubernaculum. It catches the gubernaculum in the way, dividing the gubernaculum into two parts, apart from ovary to uterus, which is called as round ligament of ovary, and from uterus to labia majora, the lower pole of gubernaculum is labia majora. This is going from uterus to labia majora. This is called as round ligament of uterus. So the gubernaculum is caught by the paramedial filter. Now there are two fallopian tubes. Obviously, there are two paramedial also. Together they come close in the midline and fuse with each other to form a single uterus. Sometimes the fusion is incomplete, giving rise to congenital anomalies of uterus. Either you will have uterine fundus, which is split into two, or you can have the entire uterus divided into two. And sometimes you can have a septum in the uterus, incomplete fusion of the two fallopian tubes. And septate vagina can also occur. Sometimes one of the paramecium duct fails to develop, in which case you will have what is called as unicornuate uterus, one horned uterus. At that time, the opposite ovary, where there is no paramecium duct developing, the ovary will descend, will go to the labial pages. So a swelling in the labial pages along associated with unicornuate uterus will imply that one of the paramecium ducts failed to develop and failed to catch the ovary in the pelvic region itself. When it comes to physiology, we talked about in a non-pregnant state, there is an external loss communicating cervix to the exterior. And there is an internal loss communicating upper part of cervical canal to uterine cavity, which is called as anatomical internal loss. Somewhere in between the anatomical internal loss and external loss, there is a region which is called as histological internal loss. This histological, you will realize that the anatomical external loss and histological internal loss remains the cervix, shorter cervix in pregnancy, whereas the portion of the cervix between internal anatomical internal loss and histological internal loss has become a part of the uterus. So the anatomical internal loss was originally located here, but has now become a part of the uterus. So the true gynecological cervix is only from the histological internal loss to external loss, whereas in a non-pregnant state, anatomical internal loss is at a much higher level. This portion of the uterus between this portion of the cervix between anatomical internal loss and histological internal loss is called as lower segment of the uterus. Rest of the uterus is the upper segment. This portion is the lower segment of the uterus. And when you do a cesarean section, you do not cut to the upper segment. You cut it only at the lower segment. So since cesarean section, you take a transverse incision on the uterus in the lower segment only. That's why the cesarean section for childbirth is called as LSCS, lower segment cesarean section, LSCS. If you cut the upper segment, in which case, in subsequent pregnancy, when the uterus enlarges enormously, there is likely to be a rupture of the uterus. Whereas lower segment does not enlarge that much. So maybe after 2 or 3 years, after the healing is completed, another pregnancy can be thought of. That's why we say there should be a gap, especially a gap after LSCS. So you want the womb to completely heal so that the uterus does not rupture the subsequent pregnancy. Sometimes you are asked, when is the only time you don't bother about LSCS? Just cut open the uterus sagittally. The answer which is expected is that usually never do it. But if the mother is dead and the child is alive in the uterus, you want to deliver the child as quickly as possible. So that time you don't bother because there is no question of subsequent pregnancy. You can cut through the uterus and remove the baby quickly because the child will otherwise suffer from irreversible anoxia, irreversible brain damage. In the living person, you can do a T2 weighted MRI. And you can see the uterus and the ovaries on either side. Here is the sagittal section. You can see the uterine cavity, uterine wall. So this is one of the methods by MRI, but much simpler than that is to study the uterus transabdominally through an amniocentegraphy, through the ultrasonography. But remember, if the uterus is an abdominal pelvic organ, the abdominal portion can be easily studied by doing a sonography. But pelvic uterus cannot be studied because of the oblique direction of sound fiber, which has to go from abdomen to pelvis, which is usually not possible. So in such a case, when the uterus is in the pelvic region itself, at say around 7th week of pregnancy, what is done is that the mother is asked to keep drinking lot of water without voiding out urine. The urine accumulates in the urinary bladder. This is also an abdominal pelvic organ. And after being full, it becomes an abdominal organ also, part of the abdominal organ. Otherwise, it's also pelvic organ. And through the translucent water or urine in the urinary bladder, an oblique direction of fibers from the anterior abdominal wall to the pelvic organ uterus can be studied. So you require a full bladder to be able to study the pelvic uterus through an ultrasonography. Alternatively, people have even tried to introduce the ultrasonic probe into the vagina to study the uterus. So that is called as transvaginal ultrasonography. Multiple ways by which the uterus can be studied in the living person. We don't usually take an X-ray, especially not in the first trimester of pregnancy, but that will damage the growing embryo. And finally, the other organs, fallopian tube has got 4 parts. Part within the uterine wall is called as intramural portion. The next part is the isthmus. The dilated part is the ampulla, where the fertilization takes place. The terminal part is called fibria, because it has got finger-like projections. This is very closely related to the ovary. So it can pick up the ovarian ovulated ovum into the fallopian tube and bring it to the ampulla. The point of it noted, the ovum is actually liberated to the peritoneal cavity and the fallopian tube picks it up. If the fallopian tube is blocked, the ovulated ovum can even go to the other side and be picked up by the fallopian tube, the opposite side as well. So it's not necessary. Usually it's picked up by the side. So there are some chemotactic signals from an unblocked fallopian tube to pick up the ovum. Fallopian tube blood supply we already discussed. Portion medial part will be related, supplied with the uterine artery. The lateral part will be supplied with the ovarian artery. Ovary receives the blood supply from the abdominal aorta. Uterus receives the blood supply from the and the region around the fallopian tube, close to the uterus, along with the round ligament and the upper part of the uterus, the lymphatics drain into labia majora. Whereas those in relation to the ovary, the lymphatics will drain into the para-aortic lymph nodes directly. With that, we come to a conclusion of topic of uterus along with adnexum. X-ray study to confirm patency of fallopian tube is by injecting a dye into the uterus, which is then flows into the fallopian tube. So it is called as hysterosalpingogram. If the dye spills into the peritoneum, that means the fallopian tube is patent. Whereas if the dye does not spill into the peritoneum, that that fallopian tube is blocked. So to confirm, if both the fallopian tubes is blocked, it is effectively sterilization, infertility in the couple. So the patency of fallopian tube can be studied by hysterosalpingogram. Always remember that you cannot do this when you suspect pregnancy. So only for those couple who are literally infertile, and hysterosalpingogram is usually done in the first half of the menstrual cycle, because fertilization occurs in the middle of the menstrual cycle. After that, the uterus is also in the secretory phase, so there will be greater complications which can occur in the second half. The first half, proliferative phase of uterus, and no chance of pregnancy. That's the time when you do a hysterosalpingogram. If there are any questions, you can ask now. Otherwise, you can mark your attendance and leave the class.